And coming up on this week's show, rail ridership is almost back to pre-COVID levels, but is there more behind the headlines? HS2 could be delayed yet again, and the blame game is already underway. And there are problems for the East Midlands Railway Class 810s. Is there a crisis coming? And finally, we have breaking news on the West Coast Railways application for an exemption to continue running Mark 1s on the main line. Welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
Well, let's kick off with some great news from the ORR, Richard. They published their latest quarterly digest of passenger rail usage data on June 12th. And the headline is that, wait for it, over the last 12 months to March 2025, the railways of Great Britain provided 1.73 billion passenger journeys. Wow, a 7% increase on the previous year. Better still, it's also really close to the 1.75 billion in the year to March 2020, before COVID wreaked its havoc. Surely, Richard, surely not even you can find reasons to be unhappy about this. Please tell me.
Not reasons to be unhappy, but reasons to suggest a little caution with the numbers. Though I'm very happy to explain why.
I'm sure if you found a tenner in the street, you'd be worrying about what had happened to the other 90, you know.
Oh, well, look, it's just that, I doubt it, but look, it's that pesky issue of like-for-like comparison. Are we comparing apples with apples? And I think the challenge is, well, in this case, not exactly. Let me explain why. The ORR stats, this document actually, it sounds as if it's going to be a dry, impenetrable thing. It's not at all. It's only about 12 pages. It's very well laid out. It's really interesting. I do encourage people to go and read these because there's as much narrative as there is as there are numbers. And one of the things that the document talks about is the context in which the numbers should be looked at. And there are two really important ones.
Okay.
They are the Elizabeth line.
All right.
And they are split ticketing. So let me just have a go at explaining the first one, the Elizabeth line, right? Because then we'll look at split ticketing. Now, the Elizabeth line's been amazingly successful, right? I mean, just absolutely superb. We've talked about it many times before. And in that sort of last 12 months, it delivered something like 250 million of those 1.73 billion passenger journeys. It's really big.
So it's a sizable contributor to the national passenger figures rather than tempted to look at it as a regional sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly, right? Now, the challenge of the Elizabeth line is that it's not actually all new. So previously, services in the east were on the Great Eastern, weren't they, out to Shenfield from Liverpool Street. Services in the west some of those were obviously Great Western services. And the central section is the new bit, right? Now, the ORR and the industry gets its passenger ridership data from a system called LNER. And previously, those numbers in the east and those numbers in the west were in LNER, but obviously the new core section, is not there. So, unfortunately, some of the Elizabeth line numbers were in the previous numbers from 29-20, and some of them were not. They're brand new. Now, so TfL reckon, I understand, the ORR mentioned this, that around 30% of the numbers are brand new, i.e. they're new to rail. If the Elizabeth line had not been built, we would not have had them, right? Which is fantastic. That's great. That's why we wanted to build projects like that. So if you say 30% of 250 million, that's about, what's that? That's about 80 million, isn't it? Thereabouts, between 75 and 80 million. So all I'm saying is that those 80 million have come about because the network got a lot bigger. And if you compare it with 2019-20, when it didn't exist, they're new. So if you say it was 1.75, it's now 1.73, really, it's not 1.73 on a like-for-like basis. It should really be about 80 million less than that. So we're getting close. We're not quite as close as we thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But and obviously, it's a fantastic thing to have finally, at some point, even if we're not there yet, get to the same as we were before COVID. That famous 1.75 billion, the doubling from BR days.
I don't doubt that at all. But just hold the bunting just yet, because
and that's just numbers, of course, passenger numbers.
And that's just passenger numbers, right? And we'll come on to revenue in a moment. Yeah, you're way ahead of me, right?
That's not usual.
It is. No, that's fair. That's actually very fair, right? But still, big tick, right? Now, split ticketing is also an issue, right? We all know what it is. I see it on the Great Western Main Line. The famous Simon Calder calls it the famous Didcot dodge, right? Where you buy 2 tickets, and as long as the train actually stops at Didcot on the way, you can have 2 tickets. And of course, the risk is that gets counted twice. So what the ORR have said they are going to do is they're doing some statistical analysis to rebase all the numbers back to 2020 to strip out the effect of split ticketing.
That'd be an exercise, isn't it?
It is quite a big exercise, but it could be as much as 5%, they say. Around about 5% is split ticketing. So if there is an element of double count, that again means that we're probably a little bit further away from getting back to the 1.75 billion of pre-COVID than we thought. So that's what I'm saying. It's great. It's really good that this recovery has happened, but it's not quite as close as we'd like yet because of those
different railway, isn't it?
And it's a different railway. And that, unfortunately, takes us on to revenue.
Well, revenues are always important, and Roger Ford's always commenting on that, compared with the numbers, as you have. So my mystic Meg, for those with long memories, tells me that you're going to tell us that's why that's not so good either.
Well, this is where we've got a structural change issue now, and it's a problem. Now, the good news is revenue has grown, okay? So in the year to March 25, the same year we've just been talking about with the ridership numbers, total revenue was 11.5 billion, and that's an 8% increase on the 10.6 billion from the previous year. Good news, right? That's great. And by the way, I should say that what the ORR do is they adjust all the historical figures for inflation so that you can see them on the same price basis.
So it is apples and apples, yeah.
So yeah, because otherwise you wouldn't really be able to compare them. So they've done that, right?
That's good.
However, here's the problem. Whereas the passenger ridership numbers are getting closer to the pre-pandemic levels, despite what we've just said about Elizabeth Line and split ticketing, they're kind of at the margin, really, rather than the core. Passenger revenue is still 1.4 billion below the 12.9 billion that it was in the year before the pandemic. So it was 12.9 billion in the year before the pandemic. It's now 11.5 now. So that's a 1.4 difference. And worth bearing in mind that although split ticketing won't affect revenue because you've got the cash, the Elizabeth Line element, some of that 30% of increased ridership will be there'll be a revenue impact as that as well. So that 1.4 gap might actually be slightly bigger than that.
But as we all know, there's a huge change in the mixer journeys, hasn't it? Which will impact yield, not least, I guess, on seasons.
Yeah. So the mix has changed. Why is the mix important? I mean, here's a stupid example. Let's say we go to Asda supermarket, right? And there's 3 vegetables off. You can buy cabbages, potatoes, and carrots. Right. But the problem is cabbages are cheaper than potatoes and carrots in my silly example. If people start buying a lot more cabbages and less potatoes because cabbages are cheaper, guess what's going to happen? The total take of vegetable sales from Morrison's is going to go down, possibly even if the total number of actual vegetables bought goes up. It's exactly the same thing here. And your point about seasons is one good example. So the mix has changed there. Season tickets, if I understand these numbers, were about 34% of the total in the year ended 2020. They're now just 13%.
That's
so we've
shocking,
gone down.
Isn't it?
Well, it's I don't know whether to be shocked by it.
Well,
I mean, there's
shocked
the,
but surprised. It's just such a
yeah,
big change in the
it's a
number.
big change, isn't
We
it?
all understand why it is, but and I think it's what I was expecting. But my jaw still dropped when I actually saw what the number was.
Yeah, no, I'm a bit the same, really. I suppose there comes a point where if you go down a hybrid working model, I mean, I see it at Chippenham Station all the time. Monday and Friday are relatively light in the car park, whereas Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is a lot busier. And so I suppose at that, a season ticket might possibly no longer be the most sensible thing. You might actually just get your tickets on a one-by-one basis.
And that's been going on for quite a while, a few years. One way
it has. It has. And the other huge thing in ticket sales, of course, advance tickets have become a lot more popular. They saw the biggest growth in the last quarter, for instance, according to the ORR. But of course, because they're advanced, they tend to be cheaper. Again, they're like cabbages, we're buying loads more of them, but they're quite a lot cheaper. So the total revenue take gone down. There's then the impact of inflation. And inflation actually is quite important because recently the cap for annual regulated fare increases has actually been set at a value below our RPI, whereas previously it was not. And what that's done, when you adjust for inflation, the average real cost of tickets has actually decreased of late. And so when you normalize across the last 5 years for inflation, I mean, it's a bit more complicated at this point, but it does mean then that again, your like-for-like revenue drops. And there's one final point, I think, Nigel, which is relevant. The average journey length has actually continued to fall. So people are doing more journeys, but the actual journey length, the ORR I've seen, has actually fallen. So all of those factors together, I mean, you can disappear down rabbit holes trying to work out this variance and that variance and all the rest of it. The absolute headline is, from volume, we're close to getting back. But in revenue, it's kind of flatlined. There's a structural gap, which means we're a long way from pre-pandemic revenue.
And I guess that the season thing is one of the biggest. I mean, I can remember the excellent Anthony Smith, it must be 5 or 6 years ago, saying that they'd noticed that sort of off-peak tickets midweek were going up and seasons were going down. And now we've seen it to its fullest extent, haven't we?
Yes, and a lot of people say, oh, well, is it not these very high-value business tickets and everybody's gone to advance? Well, there's an element of that, but actually the percentage of total ticket sales that was that business market was relatively smaller compared to seasons and leisure and all the rest of it. So it's a combination of everything, and some very clever statisticians will pull it all apart and see trends and all the rest of it. The bottom line is the revenue gap is very resistant to closing, unlike the ridership gap, which seems to be almost closed.
Okay, so linking this to current developments from Rachel from number 11, presumably then the comments made in the spending review must be of even greater concern, because you pointed out last week that government, the resource DEL, the element of spending that supports day-to-day activity on the railways and not capital, is going to go down in real terms over the life of the spending review for the DFT. That can't be good news. That's going to increase the pressure, isn't it?
Yeah. So 5% reduction in real terms year on year in the resource DEL settlement is you think, 5%, that's not much. Well, when you're talking hundreds of millions, if not billions, no, it's actually quite a big number.
It is,
and so you're right that it is a real concern. And when you hear the government say, we need the railway to get back to being able to wash its face financially, whatever that actually means, because in the end, don't forget, these are political decisions, right? These are decisions taken. The balance between fares and subsidy is just a political decision.
As are many others.
But the problem now we face is that ridership is increasing. We've seen it, right? And you see it all the time. I mean, my Sunday is a particularly busy day on the railway. my son tried to catch a train the other day and actually had to let it go on a Sunday because it was physically impossible to get on it. And this was an intercity long distance service, right? So it's really, really busy. That puts pressure on capacity, puts pressure
does, of course,
on,
yes.
Right? But the problem is revenue to fund more capacity, whether that's more services, more carriages, whatever, that's lagging, right? And just to add insult to injury, the government said, we're going to actually give you less money because
there's a perfect storm building there, isn't there?
There is. And the thing that I would say, and this is not meant to be political, but it might sound a little bit that way. I don't think anybody really believes in their heart of hearts that renationalize anything will actually save cash on a day-to-day basis, right? So it might be better for other reasons. Let's not go there. But whether it actually saves cash, I doubt it very much. So what's the answer? Well, in the end, when you got all those variables, something's got to give. And either they change their minds and put more money into it, or you reduce costs significantly. And the railway should do that, by the way. Things cost far too much.
Should always bear down on costs.
Should always bear down that. But that has a longer lead time than we'd probably like. Or you reduce services or you increase fares, right? And and effectively burn off the demand a bit. I suspect that there's some harsh realities coming in terms of those last ones, because it takes time to structurally change your cost base, right? That's not failure. It just takes time to do it. So the easier wins are just have less service,
cuts or fare hikes,
cut price. Yeah, and I don't see how we're going to avoid some of those discussions, I'm afraid.
Service cuts are always politically very difficult, as are fare increases. But of the two, my gut tells me we're going to see fare increases rather than cuts in services.
Well, you could be right. I genuinely don't know. Although I take your point on the principles of those things. I just think it's becoming now increasingly obvious that revenue gap is really resistant to being closed. And it may not be possible because of that change in mix and that change in ridership and all the rest of it, different styles of things. And more volume actually it does increase costs.
I suppose the only way that they can really solve it, given that structural change, is investment to increase services and capacity and run more trains for more groups of people.
But that costs money.
That's unlikely to happen as well.
And that's the problem, because that takes time to deliver as well, as we know. So, look, it is a real challenge. So the ORR's numbers, they are really fascinating. And I saw a lot of people welcoming them, as they should. No, yes. As they should, because ridership going up is good. Far better it's doing that than going down, right? But underneath it, there are some really big issues coming.
Classic case of victim of its own success in this
respect. There is a bit of that. There is a bit of that.
Anyway, speaking of politics and railways, which we don't often, obviously. No. I think you've got a politics and HS2 story too.
Well, as we sat down to record this week's show, which, if people aren't aware, we publish on a Thursday, and we try and record on a Wednesday to stay really current with stuff. Even so, something broke on the Wednesday morning, and that's when I say Wednesday morning, I mean the 18th of June, and that is that Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, is going to announce something about HS2. And the Daily Telegraph, broke this story. It's been all over broadcast media as well. She's going to say, apparently, that the remaining section of HS2, the bit between London and Birmingham, at least we hope between London and Birmingham, will no longer be completed by 2033. A delay of at least 2 years is likely. Now, cue the usual outpourings from those desperate to be heard.
Oh, they are told you so.
Offering an opinion on HS2, unsullied by any real grasp of what the project's all about.
Unencumbered by the facts, yeah.
Well, there is that. The problem is, of course, it's not just about HS2. It is fundamentally, I think, about the way we do things in this country.
Badly.
And there's going to be, you're going to hear lots of talk about lines in the sand and changing. And there's been a big report done by a guy called James Stewart, who's very good, by the way. He's a serious person, and he's done a serious piece of work about 89 recommendations about what we're going to change And if you believe that our system is going to embrace all of that, then you can probably see pigs flying out your window right now. The problem is the reasons why HS2 was so desperately needed haven't changed, right? And 1.73 billion passenger journeys on a highly congested network is the reason for that.
And getting worse, in fact.
And remember, there is no plan B.
Nope.
So we'll cover this in some detail. We'll have to, even though it just comes across, it feels a bit depressing and just watching the circus sometimes. But nonetheless, that's the breaking news story. Looks like it's going to be delayed again.
And we have even more breaking news now, because after we'd recorded the programme today, and that's Wednesday, June 18th, we received a statement from the ORR about progress on West Coast Railway's ongoing application to continue running Mark 1 stock on the main line without CDL. Richard.
Indeed. And we've been asking the ORR about this pretty consistently, haven't we, Nigel? For what now feels a long time, because it's been a long time.
Because it's been a long time.
Yeah, quick recap for those who aren't aware. So in order to be able to run Mark 1 hinge door rolling stock on the main line, you need two things. You need a Regulation 4 and a Regulation 5 exemption. The Regulation 5 exemption says that you've either fitted central door locking or you've got a plan to do so. And if you've not got either of those, you're not going to get an exemption. West Coast Railway said they didn't want to do that. They felt it was not appropriate. They took the ORR to court in a judicial review, and they lost. The ORR won. And immediately they did that, the ORR revoked their Regulation 5 exemption. And immediately, West Coast Railways applied for a new one. That was back in early 2024. And so here we are in June 2025. And it's been some time. And we've asked the ORR what the plan is. And this is what we were told today. We're told we, the ORR, have completed our assessment of West Coast Railway Company's application for a new exemption from Regulation 5 of the Railway Safety Regulations 1999. The company have been informed of our decision and the reasons underpinning it.
Now, normally, the ORR would publish such letters, Richard.
They would, and we're not sure why that is. That's obviously a matter for them. But I think what we can say with some, with high degree of confidence, if the decision was, which they've clearly made and communicated, because they've said that in the statement, if the decision is to award or grant, I think it's the right word, West Coast Railways an exemption, the ORR website would have been immediately updated with that information, right?
And that would be the exemption that they can carry on using Mark 1s.
Without either CDL or a plan to fit it. Yeah, exactly. That has not happened. I've checked the ORR website this morning. The section around Regulation 4 and Regulation 5 exemptions is still showing that West Coast Railways Regulation 5 certificate has been revoked. Now, I think it's safe to assume they have not been successful.
So, is it safe for us to infer that not only do they not have the exemption, but that they will never get one?
I mean, is it right to never say never? I think this has been going on for so long now. The ORR's position has actually always been clear. The arguments they presented to the judge in the judicial review were very clear.
Which they won handsomely, not just won.
And they did. And then they've made this statement. I think it is a reasonable thing to do, to say that the ORR believe that unless you have a plan to fit CDL or fit it, you are not going to get a Regulation 5 exemption. And then, so therefore that means, Nigel, that as of, now, West Coast Railways cannot run Mark 1s that do not have CDL fitted on the main line because they do not have the exemption certificate to do so. There is that debate about fare paying passengers, which we had on the show recently, which feels like a kind of a very nerdy point, but it may or may not be. But in terms of revenue earning service, where they are charging passengers to be on a train, if they've not got CDL fitted or a plan to do so, they cannot run them and they can't have fare paying passengers on the train.
So there you would have it. We believe that a reasonable inference from what we can see and not see is that no such exemption has been granted, and that under those circumstances, Mark 1 hinge door stock without CDL, it cannot lawfully be used on the main line. We have to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. Asked West Coast repeatedly for a comment about all this, but we've heard nothing. So we'll keep an eye on the situation, but that's where we are at the moment. Okay, and not cheering things up any, there's growing concern that full commissioning of East Midlands Railway's new Hitachi Class 810 Aurora units is going to be delayed. It matters because EMR currently has Class 222 Meridian units in service, which are destined for other operators. ScotRail are a likely beneficiary to replace the HS2s, excuse me, but we mentioned last week that open access operator Lumo is getting their hands on 5 6-car sets for the London Stirling operation we've discussed here recently, which is scheduled to begin in mid-2026. However, the trains need to be refurbished first, which means that if the 810s are late, there's a risk that the Class 222s leaving EMR could leave EMR short of trains.
Yep. I may be wrong, by the way, Nigel. I think the ScotRail need is not necessarily to replace it. I think it's a stopgap. They're procuring new trains, aren't they? So I think there's an element of stopgap in there. But
I know you enjoy telling me I'm wrong, Richard. So
I think somebody out there will know the detail. I have to be honest. I've never really got that excited about which train's going where. But this does actually get quite important. So we did ask EMR, East Midlands Railway, what the situation was, and a spokesman said this. They said, "I'm pleased to share." Or start with the good news bit, right? I'm pleased to share that 5-car type testing for our new Class 810 Aurora trains has been completed, and the ORR granted authorization to place into service in May 2025, a key program milestone. Well, yes, it is. However, testing and the transfer of units to EMR and Rock Rail, who are the funder, are currently paused while Hitachi Rail investigates functional issues identified in early units. Full testing, including for 10-car operation, is expected to resume in summer 2025. And then comes the killer bit. We, that's EMR, remain committed to introducing the Aurora fleet on our intercity route in 2025, with phased rollout continuing into 2026. In parallel, we're assessing the potential impact on our timetable due to the fixed return dates of our Class 222 trains from October 2025. And exploring mitigation strategies to ensure service continuity. So we asked EMR what they meant by mitigation strategies, because there aren't exactly many surplus 125 mile an hour trains not accounted for elsewhere sitting around idle doing nothing, and we don't yet have a full response to that. So that's the current situation. Doesn't feel particularly good.
No, it feels like, again, another perfect storm brewing, because that happened once before, wasn't it, back in 2018 with late transfer of fleets between companies, and that was one of the reasons for the 2018 meltdown, wasn't it?
I think it's the problems with cascades of rolling stock are great.
I go back many, it's a long tradition.
It is, but it's a little bit like buying a house. If somebody in the chain decides to pull out, everybody suffers, isn't it? Yeah. And it's not dissimilar here. I think the challenges are new. We'll be doing our interviews, which we recorded with Stadler on our recent trip to Northumberland soon, and it's very interesting. I talked to them, if you recall, about are we making trains too complicated and making it too hard to get them into service? I think people will be interested to hear what one of the leading rolling stock manufacturers had to say on that.
Indeed so. Right, some good news now. Praise the Lord. We've managed to record an exclusive interview with David Horne, Managing Director of London and North Eastern Railway. Now, David's one of the most highly respected leaders we have in the railway today, and Richard went to York to chat with him on a platform end about a wide range of subjects. Excuse me. Here's an excerpt from the interview when Richard asked David about the rather controversial ticketing simplification pilot that's been running on LNER for some time and what happens next.
And what you've kind of ended up with now is a little bit of the end of the World Cup Railway.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a little bit like, if I compare it with the French TGV, which is you've really got to have a reservation on a train in order to travel.
Yeah.
Is that the vision?
Well, that was certainly the vision in terms of our long distance routes. And that was what really so many of our existing customers were doing and are doing. They were buying in advance for specific trains with reserved seats. And really, the thing is, if we just think of some of the products that we used to sell, we'll never make it easy for the future customers to use by train. We'll have a fare structure and a retail proposition that is so complicated it puts people off travelling by train. We always talk about the winners and the losers of fares reform, and I'd be the first to admit, there will always be a few losers when it comes to changing the fares, but it's about trying to do something for the greater good, for the future of the industry, that reflects what customers are doing today. And it was a pilot, and both the single fare, single leg pricing and the simpler fares are pilots. We are giving these things a go. They are genuine pilots where we're taking customer feedback. We'll feed that back through to colleagues at the DFT. And we haven't yet taken any decisions about what we'll do moving forward.
One of the challenges with it, though, is that now, if you travel to Edinburgh, the only genuinely refundable fare is the full fare, which is £205 each way, right? The 70-minute flex one, you can change the trains, I think, but you can't get it refunded. And things do change. I mean, surely that one thing that needs to be considered is that 70-minute flex fare becoming refundable. Otherwise, we are putting off people who might have been the casual traveller.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that is one of the things that, as we move forward, we would have to consider. Of course, it's come about because the semi-flexible fare is built off the advanced fare. It's you pay a few more pounds on top of whatever the advanced fare is for the train you're travelling on. And of course, the advanced fare is non-refundable.
Yeah.
There's a lot of change of journey flexibility within what we do. Whether you've got the flexible product or you've just got an advanced product, we do see a lot of customers changing the train that they're booked on. And so we've tried to make that process easier as well. But yes, in terms of the refund, it's not something actually that many customers have commented on. Again, let's listen to the real customers and we'll take that real insight.
That's a very polite way of putting it, but a fair challenge. Yeah.
But you're right. These things are always about, let's have a go. Let's get the see how it works in practice and tweak it to make sure that we're always getting it right for customers.
So we'll publish the full interview with David on Tuesday, June 24th around lunchtime, and it really is one not to miss. David's a great leader with a hugely knowledgeable railway background, totally professional. And as all of those who know David will attest, he's a really lovely bloke as well, always smiling, whatever the adversity. At least in public. I'm sure he has his off days. It's a positive and uplifting interview with a few tricky balls bowled by Richard to spice things up, all handled very well at the interview crease by David, and certainly one to watch. I hope you like the cricketing analogy there, Richard.
I'm very impressed by that, actually.
That I know what a crease is.
Yeah, very good. And, all of that was fantastic. Can I just say, by the way, it was a lovely interview to do. He is exactly as you describe. We did it at the south end of York Station. Boy, it's busy. I mean, it was train after train after
is.
train after train. And so managing the audio with all of this stuff going on was a bit of a nightmare. But as long as everybody accepts it's open air on a very busy station, I think everybody really enjoyed it.
But you got a great shot of a 37 growling by, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, one for the purists, I think, but nonetheless, you're absolutely right.
One that arrived in my inbox, dear viewer, with the instruction, turn the volume up full to watch this.
Absolutely. English Electric.
And very enjoyable it was. And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us. First of all, our thanks to RIA, the Railway Industry Association, who are our first programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our first media supporter. Thanks, guys. Your support, as ever, is hugely appreciated. Then, a big thank you to everyone who has left us a super thanks on YouTube this week. And you are Bob Walsh, Stephen White, John Kirkman, Alan Kirkman, Chris Exley, Roddy Jenkins, Brian Gosden, Ben Phillips, Alistair Rutledge, and Callum Thornelow. We really do appreciate so many of you leaving us super thanks. They really help us to move towards sustainability. Got to be a good thing. So thank you very much indeed.
And thanks also to our new gold and silver members who are Alex Hargreaves, Richard Porter, Aid D, Graham L, and to Simon Pilkington, who upgraded from silver to gold. Now you can see all our supporters and members. We list them at the end of the show in the credits. And thank you to everybody. If you are a gold or silver member, please could I ask you to drop us an email to info@greensignals.org so that with your postal address, so that we can send you the goodies you get as part of your gold and silver membership.
Indeed. And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. So to kick off, British Steel has secured a 5-year, £500 million contract with Network Rail to supply between 70,000 and 80,000 tonnes of rail per year. That's enough to stretch, I love these numbers, to stretch between London and Edinburgh. There's an option to extend for a further 3 years, and all the rails will be manufactured at British Steel's Scunthorpe Steelworks. The site has been supplying Network Rail's track for more than 20 years, and in the last decade, they've made more than 1 million tonnes of rail for the UK network. I didn't realise it was 20 years since Workington went.
It's remarkable, isn't it? You know, when I was at York doing the David Horne interview, I saw something that I have not seen for a very long time, which is a train came through, a freight train carrying long welded, continuous welded rail. And I always thought it was hilarious when you look at telephoto shots of those, how they're going around curves and the rails are obviously
bending,
but then they're not falling off the wagons. I always found the physics of that quite fascinating, but there you go.
And the other question before you go on is why the hell they don't send them round the avoiding lines, but we'll not get into that now.
I don't know that. Right. Another Network Rail contract, Nigel. A bit of a surprise, this one. And thanks to David Redgewell for putting us onto this. Go-Op, remember them. They're the open access operator based in Wiltshire and Somerset. They've signed a track access contract with Network Rail, and they've been offered the use, we're told, of the Class 769s. Those are those, sort of hybrid trains, instead of the Class 150 Sprinters that they were going to use. They're the first cooperative to sign a track access contract, and they now need to find some more investment partners to help them reach the £2.5 million cost to launch the service. And the reason why I said it was a bit of a surprise, it's like they've signed a contract and still have the money to raise, but nonetheless, I'm sure there's a reason for that. We wait to see how they get on with their fundraising.
Now, a number of railway and transport names were recognised in the King's Birthday Honours list this week, which is great to see. We've picked out a few notable ones here, but we'll stick a full list of the ones we spotted on our website. So do let us know, excuse me, if you think we've missed anyone, and we'll get them added. Chris Green was made an OBE for services to the railway. Finally, not before time that Chris has got a gong. RSSB employees Vaibhav Puri and Bridget Eichhoff were awarded OBE and MBE respectively. Vaibhav received his honour for his contribution to railway safety and standards, while Bridget's was for services to railway engineering. Jenny Hamilton, lead sponsor at TfL, has been awarded an MBE for her innovative work that transformed London's iconic tube stations. And Graham Lee, chair of the Statfold Narrowgauge Museum Trust, was made an MBE for services to heritage railway preservation and to charity. And what Graham's and his team have achieved at Statfold is extraordinary. There are several others that we just didn't have time to mention here, but congratulations to everyone who was honoured with a gong. Great to see so many railway names listed, so well done to each and every one of you.
Well done. They're all very deserving. I have to just mention Bridget Eickhoff, who helped me enormously when I was at Virgin, when we were doing the Pendolino specification. She is a world authority on tilting trains and the technical issues around it. She's absolutely superb. So I was delighted to see that. Here's two great rail freight stories, Nigel. The first is this. The first two of GB Railfreight's Class 99s have arrived in the UK. They're the first part of an order of 30 of the new Stadler locomotives, with the rest due to obviously arrive later in this year and throughout 2026. The two locomotives arrived by ship to Bristol early this week, and then were dragged to Leicester by GB Rail Freight, where they'll be maintained by Stadler Rail Services at a new facility in Leicester. They'll then undergo testing and commissioning before entering commercial service. They are really exciting, these locomotives.
Beefy.
They are unbelievable. They've got a dual drive system, which means they can operate in electric or diesel electric mode, but both are enormously powerful, and they're going to be very impressive. One great little bit of news, with the picture that those of you watching on YouTube will just have seen, was sent to us by Stephen Bates, who is a driver for GB Rail Freight and a big fan and listener of Green Signals. And Stephen drove the train pulling the 99s from Avonmouth up to Cheltenham on the way. So thank you, Stephen, for sending through that picture. Absolutely superb. And the other freight story, this is great. This is really good. The first commercial freight train has run on East West Rail.
Cheers,
I guess it must be. Yeah, it must be the first commercial train, I guess. On Monday, just gone, DB Cargo ran a train from Didcot onto East West Rail at Oxford, and then travelled 35 miles to Milton Keynes before connecting with the West Coast Main Line. It's the first time the line's been used for commercial freight after months of signaller and driver training since the line was completed last October. It was actually apparently part of a dual first, because the train also marked entry into service of Maritime Transport's Northampton Gateway Terminal. Always exciting to see a brand new bit of railway coming into traffic, isn't it?
Another milestone for HS2 this week. The third of 4 TBMs, tunnel boring machines, has completed its work on the 8.4 mile long Northolt tunnel, which is expected to be completed, in terms of tunnelling at least, this summer. Emily completed her 3.4 mile tunnel drive at Green Park Way in Greenford. She was launched in February 2024 and has moved, wait for it, 775,000 tonnes of London clay and installed 17,514 tunnel segments. Well done, Emily.
That's fantastic. And before we finish the news roundup, Nigel, this is one that is a subject that people get excited about. I know you get very excited about.
I do.
This, and that's vegetation management on the railway. Network Rail is apparently about to undertake extensive tree and vegetation management work. I think that means cutting it
down, yeah.
On the West Highland line, which will open up more of the incredible views on the route. The work will, I don't think that's all it will do, will it? I mean, it obviously helps in terms of, leaf
safety,
fall,
leaf fall, visibility
Indeed.
of signals. Well, they
yeah,
aren't
sorry,
there,
TB,
but you know
but I know I knew we were going to say that, right?
Before the emails start arriving.
Yeah, the work will start between the Falls of Fallock to just beyond Crean Larrick Station over the River Fillen, clearing trees and vegetation up to 6 metres either side of the tracks on land within the railway boundary. We've been told that ecological surveys have been carried out to identify any nesting birds, protected species or sensitive habitat sites first, and they'll continue to monitor as the work takes place, although of course it is also still a railway. But there you go. It's good. It's a exciting move.
And
Pleased
not
with that.
the only place where green tunnels need to be removed, is it? But there you go. And that's the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news, local, national, you can drop us an email at news@greensignals.org. We can't promise to read them all out, but if we read yours, we'll credit it.
We will indeed, which means it's now time to do the quiz.
Fanfare.
Now, last week's question was this. When did British Rail run its last ever steam train? Wow. Right, wow. We nearly set a record for the number of answers. I think we were very
close. You'd need a big hat.
Yes. Now, a few people, but actually only a few, said the 15 Guinea special, which was the last mainline official steam train. I think some charters ran later, but that ran on the 11th of August 1968. However, I didn't say standard gauge. I said British Rail's last ever steam train. And their last railway line before it was privatised was the Vale of Rydal light railway that runs from Aberystwyth up to Devil's Bridge. But then it got complicated, Nigel, because quite a few people said, the 11th of November 1988, which of course was the end of the season, and they didn't run trains during the winter as a rule. However, it didn't actually get privatised till the end of March 1989. So quite a lot of people said the end of March 1989. One person was absolutely spot on and said the last steam-hauled passenger working was on the 18th of December 1988, when BR ran a Santa special on the Vale of Rydal railway line, operated by number 7 Owen Glendower, but they went on. However, the very last steam working operated by British Rail with one of their own locomotives was the 16th of March 1989. Number 7 operated an inspection train on the Vale of Rydal for the Railway Inspectorate ahead of the transfer of the line to its new owner and operator. I'm afraid that's just too good an answer. 16th of March 1989. So the winner of the quiz this week is Will Smith. So well done, Will. If you send us another email to quiz@greensignals.org, we will get your quiz winner's mug delivered to you. 16th of March 1989. There you go.
Can I just chip in there? It's my turn now to say I think you were wrong earlier, Richard.
Why?
The 15 Guinea special was the last beer. There were no charters after that, to my knowledge, because there was a steam ban until 1971, which was breached by Peter Pryor and King George V.
I would have agreed with you, except somebody said that British Rail ran, I think there was something at Paddington or something, but maybe that was they contracted out and it wasn't their engine. So in which case, yes, you're right. Yeah, no, and I got a bit confused by that as well. But there you go.
We're
right, isn't it fascinating what people know and what they tell you? Right. This week's quiz, much easier one this week. Much easier. I thought we would do an easy one. Why, in railway terms, is the 18th of March 1960 such an important date? Right, if you think you know, answer please to quiz@greensignals.org by midday on Saturday. I'm struggling here. Right, it must be 18, 19, 20, 21. Right, so Saturday the 21st of June by midday, and then we'll put all the correct answers, of which I'm expecting many, into a hat and pick one out at random.
I don't know for sure, but I think I can guess, and I'd Google to find out. But I'm sure lots of other people
Google nightmare
will do the same. And here's a nice little update on Alstom's greatest gathering, which isn't that far away now, Richard. We have to talk about that. It opens on August the 1st. A great display of narrow gauge engines has been confirmed to attend. Volunteers from Alstom, Festiniog Railway and Statfold Barn Railway will install a 2-foot gauge demonstration line on site so that Prince, the oldest operating narrow gauge locomotive on the planet, built in 1863 for the Festiniog Railway, can haul passengers in 2 of the FR's original carriages. Joining Prince will be Tranquil number 4, the last narrow gauge steam locomotive built in the UK for industrial use in 1971. I did not know that. There will also be a 15-inch gauge line installed to offer rides behind 1896-built Katie from the Ravenglass and Eskdale Preservation Society and Anne from the Exmoor Steam Railway, built around 100 years later, which will be operated courtesy of the Perrygrove Railway, featured recently in an excellent video by Richard.
It's going to be an amazing sight, all of that, isn't it? This is turning out to be a really brilliant event.
Absolutely. And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel because it really does help us. And if you really want to support us, find out about membership on YouTube or Patreon, for which we'll get you all sorts of cool stuff. But most importantly, join us again for the next week for this show, which will always be free. See you then. Until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Have yourselves a fantastic week.